Hey there, hope you're having a wonderful day. In this video, we're going to go over the initializer list or initialization list. So this is one of the topics in C++ where people learn the syntax, but they don't really understand the use case. So the initializer list is used to initialize member variables before the constructor is invoked. And this is especially useful if you have const data members. And you can also avoid using the this keyword if you use the initializer list. And finally, it is useful for initializing a base class via inheritance. Now, we haven't covered inheritance yet, so you can ignore this one. When we cover inheritance, we will revisit the topic. So in the previous few videos, we implemented this fraction class. So let me expand it. You can see there's a numerator and denominator. And in the previous video, we went over multiple constructors. So we created two constructors here. One is the default constructor, and the other takes in a numerator and denominator. And we also went over default parameters. So if we don't pass in a denominator, by default, we set it to 1. Actually, we can also do the same thing for numerator. So here you can see we set numerator to 0 within the default constructor. We can also do the same for numerator. So let's delete this. And do note that the parameters go from left to right, so you can have a default parameter for numerator only if you have one for denominator. So if you didn't have a parameter over here, for example, then you would get an error. And of course, we have our setters and getters for numerator and denominator. And we have our print fraction function. So over here, I create 3 fractions. One of them, I pass in 2 parameters for numerator and denominator. The other, I pass in 1 for the numerator. And finally, the last one, I pass in nothing. So this is going to invoke the default constructor with the default values 0 and 1 for numerator and denominator. So if I save and run the program, you can see this is what we get. So 11 over 15, 11 over 1, and 0 over 1. Alright, now let's go over initialization list or initializer list. So in our constructor over here, what I can do is instead of assigning the numerator and denominator within the constructor, we can do so using an initializer list. And to add that, you need to add a colon and the name of the data member. In this case, it is numerator. And inside this parentheses, you add the name of the parameter, which is numerator. And I'm going to put this on the next line just so you can see it. So we have one parameter, and I can also add another one separated by a comma. Denominator is the member variable name, and here we're going to pass in the parameter from denominator. Okay, now if I save and run a program, you can see we get the same thing as before. And notice here, we don't have to specify the this keyword to distinguish the member variable name from the parameter name. So that's one benefit of using the initializer list. Another benefit of using the initializer list is with const data members. So let's say I have a const fraction. Basically, if I were to set this as const and this as well, and I get rid of the initializer list for now, and I bring back this numerator and set it to numerator and denominator, you can see we would get an error, and if I hover over the error, it'll say expression must be modifiable. So when we declare a data member as const, we won't be able to assign it values based on the parameters in our constructor. But if you do it through the initializer list, you will be able to assign these const data members the parameter values. So let's remove the const. So why would you want to have a const data member? Well, the benefit would be that if you do use const data members, you won't need to add getters and setters. And if you don't need getters and setters, then you can use a struct. So let me collapse this. And over here, let's create a new struct. And I'm going to call this const fraction. Don't forget the semicolon here. So everything is going to be public by default, which is fine because I'm going to add const data members. So const int numerator, const int denominator, and here I'm going to add a constructor. So const fraction will take in a numerator and a denominator. And here I'm going to add the initializer list. So numerator, parentheses, numerator, and denominator, parentheses, denominator. And then down here, let's create an instance of the const fraction. And I'm going to call this const frac1. We'll pass in 4 for the numerator and 10 for the denominator. And since this is a struct, the data members are public. So here I can do std cout const frac1 dot numerator, const frac1 dot denominator. And let's save and run the program. And you can see we get 4 out of 10 for the const fraction. And because the data members are const, I wouldn't be able to do something like const frac1 dot numerator and change this to 20, and const frac1 dot denominator and change this one to 50. So if I hover over the const frac1 variable, you'll see it says expression must be modifiable. So with the initializer list, we can initialize the data members with const values from the parameters. So let's comment this out. And of course, we can add the print fraction method. So let me just copy and paste that here. Okay. And now down here, I can just do const frac1 dot print fraction. Now let's save and run the program. And you can see we get 4 over 10. Alright, so initializer list is useful for initializing member variables before the constructor is invoked, and it is also useful for const member variables, as they cannot be assigned values after creation, and we cannot assign them values within the constructor. And of course, with the initializer list, we don't have to use the this keyword with the arrow operator. Instead, we can just use the same member variable name as the parameter name. Now, there's also one more thing I want to mention. So with the initializer list, we assign the data members the values of the parameters directly. So let me get rid of this, and I'm going to bring back the constructor where we assign the numerator and denominator values. So if we assign the data members with the parameters like so, what we're actually doing is reassigning the values. So basically, we create the int numerator here and the value 0, and we reassign it 0 over here. Denominator is 0, and we reassign it 1 over here. Now this is fine because this is an integer, so it's not a big deal. But let's say if you had a bigger class, for example, a vector. Let's say I had a vector of strings. And I'll just call this vec. So let me include string and include vector. So let's say you had this vector of strings. So in this case, this is going to initialize as an empty vector. Now, if I do something like this vec is equal to vec. So let me just pass in a parameter over here. So let's say I pass in this vector. Well, what's going to happen is we're going to create an empty vector, and then we pass in a vector over here and reassign it back to this vector data member variable. So we're doing this extra step. Basically, we're initializing a vector that we won't use, only for the data member to be reassigned. So if you had this inside an initializer list, this will skip the default construction of the empty vector. So this will make your program more efficient, especially if you have a data member that is a class with a lot of member variables that need to be initialized. Alright, so that's the idea of the initializer list or initialization list in C++. Hopefully you found this video helpful, and if you did, make sure you give this video a like. If you have any questions, let me know down below in the comments. And as always, if you want to stay up to date for more C++ tutorials like this one, make sure you subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye bye.